is 1/2, then the 2h is 1, and this is just ordinary Brownian motion. Okay, so that's a generalization of Brownian motion. Okay. So from the covariance, you can compute the variance of an increment, and then this turns out to be t minus s power 2h. So this means that the fractional Brownian motion has stationary increments. That's a very important property. Okay, and also this is a very important property because this property tells you what is the size of the increments. The size of the increment is more or less of the order of t minus s power h, roughly speaking. So roughly speaking, we can say that Vt minus Vs is of the order of t minus s power h. So actually, you can make this more precise using Kolmogorov continuity criterion, and then turns out that the trajectories of the fractional Brownian motion almost surely are wholly continuous about the gamma for any gamma less than h. So this means that parameter h controls the regularity of the trajectories. If h is bigger than 1/2, you have a process which is more regular than Brownian motion. If h is less than 1/2, you have a process which is rougher than Brownian motion. Okay, so another important property of fractional Brownian motion, which is relevant here, is self-similarity. So perhaps this is the most simplest examples or more studied examples of self-similar process. Okay? And this means that h is the index of self-similarity. So if you make a change of scaling time, you multiply time by a, and then you make a change of scaling space by a minus power h, then this turns out to be a fractional Brownian motion with the same cross parameter. And this is simply because the covariance is homogeneous, okay, of order 2h. Okay? So in other words, this is the self-similarity property. You zoom trajectory and you get the trajectory that gets the same distribution as the original one. That's the notion of self-similarity. Okay, so continuing with the properties of fractional Brownian motion. So unlike the Brownian motion, it has correlated increments. So I'm going to denote by rho hn that's the covariance between two increments that they are at distance n. So that's the covariance between v1 and vn plus 1 minus vn. And then if you compute this covariance using this covariance function, you get this. And then as n is large, then this behaves as n to the power 2h minus 2 because this is like the second derivative. So this means that the covariance between two increments decays exponentially as n goes to infinity, and the rate is n to the power 2h minus 2. And then you have also this factor 2h minus 1, which is positive when h is bigger than 1/2 and negative if h is less than 1/2. So if h is bigger than 1/2, this correlation is positive, and then also this series is divergent, and then people say that this means that this is a long memory process. And if h is less than 1/2, then the correlation between two increments is negative. They are negatively correlated, and this is called the determinants property. And the series of correlations is convergent. So that's also well known. And then finally, another property is the 1/h variation. So Brownian motion has finite quadratic variation. And here you have a similar property, but instead of quadratic variation, you have 1/h. So this means that you take a fixed time interval, and then you take a uniform partition of size t over n, and then you take the sum of the absolute values of the increments to the power 1/h. Then this converges surely and in p to a constant times the length of the interval. And that's an immediate consequence of the self-similarity property and the abelian theorem. So the idea is that the sum of increments power 1/h by self-similarity, the sequence has the same distribution as the sequence. So here I go from it over n to I, and then I have to multiply by t over n power minus h by stationary sequence, which is ergodic because of the decay of the covariance, taken up by the ergodic theorem, and this average equals to the constant. Okay, so this actually was proven by Pierce Rogers in 1997. So this is another important property which is a consequence of the self-similarity of the fractional Brownian motion. So here, for example, you have some examples of trajectories. H equal to 1 half is Brownian motion, like this. So if H is bigger, that's more regular, and then something like this. And if H is less, you have these intermittencies, so there's a lot of up and downs, and then the trajectories are much more irregular. Okay. Trajectories of the Brownian motion. Okay, so what we want to do with fractional Brownian motion is to construct a stochastic calculus and to solve differential equations. That's the purpose. So the idea is, well, you want to define the stochastic integrals, and then of course if H is different from 1/2, you don't have mathematical properties, you cannot use classical Ito calculus and have to use other methods. And essentially there are two approaches that have been developed in the last 10 years more or less. One is Pathwise methods, which means fix a trajectory and define a stochastic integral for every trajectory. And then to do this, what you need is differential calculus, but for functions which are not differential. Functions which are just Holder continuums of order less than 1. Okay? And then there has been also, I'm not going to talk about this, but people also have used these variable calculus, the divergence operator, Scorpot integral, to define integrals which are different from the Pathwise integrals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these different ways to construct stochastic integrals in the case where H is, mainly we'll focus on the case H is bigger than 1/2. And I will start with these Pathwise methods. But before this, let's discuss a little bit the definition of stochastic integrals when the process U is just a deterministic function. So for Brownian motion, for example, you can integrate L2 functions, and you have the isometry. Okay. So what happens with the fractional Brownian motion? Then you can use a procedure, which actually can be used for any Gaussian process. So you take step function phi, okay? So these are the set of step functions, and then you define the integral. So this is a deterministic function, and the integral is just the sum, okay? The corresponding Riemann sum. So this means that the integral of indicator function is just the increment of the process of this indicator function, and then what you do, so this gives you an integral for a step function, which is a linear space, and then you take the closure of this space of step functions with respect to a linear product, and the inner product is, because you want to have an isometry, the inner product is going to be just the covariance of the fractional Brownian motion. So you define the inner product of two indicator functions by this way, and then you extend this by linearity to all step functions, and then you take the closure of E, and then the closure of E will be exactly the set of elements that can be integrated. The problem is that H is an abstract Hilbert space because it's defined as the closure of E. So it's not clear why the elements of H can be represented as functions. That's the main piece here. So H is an abstract Hilbert space, and then of course you can extend this integral to all the elements in H, and you can denote this as this integral, although you don't know if phi is a function or not, so it doesn't matter. And then this Hilbert space H, that way turns out to be isometric to the Gaussian space expanded by VH. So that's a general construction that you can do for any Gaussian process. And then the problem always is to characterize this space H, which is the closure of E with respect to this inner product. So what is H? What is this space H, which is the closure of E? Of course, for Brownian motion, we know what is H. For Brownian motion, H is just L2. So when H is 1/2, this is space H is just L2 of 0T. Okay. So what happens is that if h is bigger than 1/2, h is much bigger than L2, and even h contains distributions. It's not a space of functions. And this was observed in a paper, a nice paper by Imperial Center, and they characterize the space H, and then actually it turns out that H contains the set of functions, so it's that this is integrable, and this kernel here is just the second derivative of the covariance with respect to T and with respect to X. Okay? And this is space H with bar, that's a space of functions, which actually it contains L1, there is a continuous embedding here, contains L1 over H, which is bigger actually than L2. So this is when H is less than 1/2, is bigger than 1/2, sorry. And then when H is less than 1/2, then what happens is that for a function to be integrable, you need some regularity. So in that case, H is a space of functions, and actually is a kind of fractional Sobolev space. And this space, I'm not going to define it, but anyway, it contains all the continuous functions of order bigger than 1/2 minus H. So if you have a little bit of regularity given by this difference, then you are in the space H. So conclusion is that if H is smaller, the process is very regular, and you need some regularity of your function to be integrable, and if H is bigger, then you have even distributions. And if H is 1/2, of course, H is distribution. So that's the integral of deterministic functions. Okay. So now I'm going to move to the definition of integrals of stochastic processes. Okay, and then I will start with the case H bigger than 1/2. Then if you want to define a pathwise integral, then what you have to do is to go back to the integral introduced by Young in the 30s, and is a theorem that was proved in Young in 36, and it tells you the following: suppose that you have two functions. This is a deterministic result. There is no probability here. So you have two functions, f and g, and suppose that they are Holder continuous. There's gamma and mu, and gamma plus mu is bigger than 1. For example, if both of them are bigger than 1/2, this is true. Okay? Gamma plus mu is bigger than 1. Then in that case, the Riemann-Stieltjes integral f dg exists. Riemann-Stieltjes means that, well, you take the limit of Riemann sums where Si is any intermediate point, and the limit exists when the mesh of the partition goes to 0, and the limit doesn't depend on the choice of the intermediate points. So that's the Riemann-Stieltjes integral, which usually exists if G has multivariation, because then you have a measure. But which tells you that if F has some regularity, because G Holder continuous of order less than 1 means that G might not have bounded variation. So this is not an integral with respect to a measure. It's another kind of object. And then this exists provided F and G has this Holder continuity. So now the idea is that you can use this Young integral to construct stochastic integrals with respect to the fractional Brownian motion when H is bigger than 1/2. Okay? And for example, you can define this integral provided U is Holder continuous of order beta if beta is bigger than 1 minus H. Because in that case, because you know that B is Holder continuous almost of order H, more or less. So if you have beta plus H bigger than 1, then this integral will exist as a Young integral. Okay? So that's the idea. And actually, this integral follows the rules of classical calculus. So for example, if you have a C2 function, you have f of dh equals to f of 0 plus the integral of f prime dv, where this is a Young integral. And then because f is differentiable, this is Holder continuous of order h, this is almost h. This is also Holder continuous almost h, so this integral exists because the sum of the two Holder continuity orders is bigger than 1. Okay? So that's the pathwise approach when h is bigger than 1/2. And so this is another approach to this case that is a little bit different. And it was introduced by Martina Zeller in '98. which is based on fractional calculus. So you can define this integral the following way. So suppose that you take alpha between 1 minus h and beta. Beta is the Hilbert continuity of U, remember. And then what you do is you define the integral in that way. And it turns out that under the assumptions of the Young's theorem, this integral coincides with this one. Right? And then here, these d alpha and dy minus alpha, these are fractional derivative operators, which are actually integrals. And the idea is that this is a kind of fractional integration by parts. So what you do is you take this derivative d here, and then integration by parts means that this derivative is going to be applied to u. That instead of this, you keep d minus 1 alpha, you keep 1 minus alpha percentage of this derivative into b, and then you take only alpha part of it, and you get it to u, you move it to u. So it's a fractional integration by parts. You just take a fraction, an alpha fraction of the derivative, and then you apply this to u. But this alpha fraction of the derivative is not an ordinary derivative. It is an integral operator, which is defined in that way. And then there are two integral operators. One is a 0 plus, the other is a t minus. It gets a little bit different definitions. And then, of course, you can see the advantage of this approach is that from this formula, which is an exact formula, you can get easily estimates, because this is a vacuum dt. So you just put out the value inside, then you use Holder continuity, and you can get estimates very easily. So this is very appropriate to get estimates of the integral. Of course, for the Young integral, there are also estimates using p variation norms and also Holder norms. But the advantage of this is that you have an exact formula for the integral. Okay, so let me make some comments about what happens if h is less than 1/2. And well, this is well known for Brownian motion. I mean, so what I'm going to make some comments about what happens if you try to define the integral using Riemann sums, okay, which is a natural approach to define an integral. Okay, Riemann sums is taken into Riemann sums. So what happens, this is well known. For Brownian motion, if you take forward Riemann sums, so forward Riemann sums means that you take the value of the process at the left point of the integral. So remember that this is the increment between I and I plus 1. Make this. So this IT over n, remember this is b I plus 1 t over n minus b I t over n. So you take forward Riemann sums, you get the Ito integral, and you put a delta here to the Ito integral, and you have the Ito formula, okay, with the complementary term. And then if you take symmetric integrals, for example, the middle point or the average, then you get the Stochastic integral. So still in that case, you see that the Riemann-Stieltjes integral doesn't exist, it is well known. And the integral depends on the kind of Riemann sums you choose. So to get the Ito integral, you need to choose forward Riemann sums. And to get the Stochastic integral, you can take any kind of symmetric Riemann sums. There are different definitions of the Stochastic integral using symmetric Riemann sums. So this is for h equal to 1/2. So what happens if you do this procedure for h less than 1/2? Okay. So now here, the first thing is that forward Riemann sums diverge, and you need to use symmetric Riemann sums. Otherwise, you get a divergence sentence. And then if you use symmetric Riemann sums, then the limit exists, and is what you want. So I'm talking about the particular case of f prime dv. Okay? So I'm talking about this integral. So I'm talking about this integral f prime bht dbht. So what they want to do is to define this integral as limit of Riemann sums. So what happens is that, for example, if you take what is called the midpoint Riemann sum, which means that I take that's the middle point between IT over n and I plus 1t over n. So this is called the midpoint Riemann sum. And this converges to what you want, because you want to have chain rule in probability if h is bigger than 1/4. So you can go down to 1/4, and then have these midpoint Riemann sums to converge. And then, on the other hand, if you take another symmetric integral, which is well known, which is the trapezoidal Riemann sum, which instead of the middle point, you take the average between the 2 points, then you get the same result, but you can go back down further to 1/6. And these two values are sharp in the sense that if you take a very simple function x squared, then you get divergence in the critical case. Okay. So that's a little bit surprising that eventually less than 1/2, symmetric Riemann sums converge. So that's the philosophy. But the limit might depend on the kind of, the values of h for which the limit exists might depend on the type of Riemann sum you have. And then some people have been interested in this, and then what happens in the critical case when you have equality here, and then when you have equality, then you have an interesting phenomenon which is called Ito formula law. So for example, Ivan Rodin and Antonio Revillac, they proved that in the critical case 1/4, you take the middle point Riemann sums, they converge to some integral, and this integral actually, the limit is something like this. So you get an additional term here, which looks like the Ito formula, the second derivative, but instead of dt, there is a dwt, where w is a Brownian motion independent of vh. So this is a kind of non-central limit theorem. It's not an Ito formula in law, it's a non-central limit theorem where the limit is conditionally Gaussian. So the limit has random variance. So the variance depends on b 1/4. And then w is independent Brownian motion. And there's a constant here. So this is for h equal to 1/4, and actually you have something similar for h equal to 1/6, but in that case you have a third derivative. So that's far from the Ito formula, because now you have a third derivative here. And again you have a Brownian motion independent of vh. So these are kind of examples of non-central limit theorems that occur on these critical cases 1/4 and 1/6, or fractional Brownian motion. So that's some results. And then with one of my graduate students at KU, Daniel Harnett, and we have tried to extend these results to more general processes other than fractional Brownian motion. And we have identified a general class of processes for which this is true, for both results are true. And so this is the next slide. So in the paper with Daniel, we have taken the class of processes for which you have this result, and this class includes another example of some similar process, which is the bifractional Brownian motion, which is a generalization of the fractional Brownian motion, which depends on two parameters, h and k. So you see that when k is 1, you have this. But here k can be any number between 0 and 1. And then what happens, for example, we prove it with Hartnett that the middle point Riemann sums converge, and the critical case with hk equals to 1/4, which corresponds to the case h equal to 1/4 in that case. And so here, that's the only place now I am going to talk about stochastic partial differential equations, which doesn't seem to be connected with this topic. So here is an SPD. So if you take, so this diffractional Brownian motion is connected to SPDs in the following sense. You take the classical one-dimensional stochastic heat equation given by space-time white noise. See here, I'm using the Davage notation. He's not here. He's coming later. Okay, this is Davage notation for the space-time white noise. And then what happens is that if you take the solution in time, you fix the space variable, for example, 0, doesn't matter. Then this is a bifractional Brownian motion with parameters 1/2, 1/2. So in some sense, this behaves as a fractional with parameter 1/4. And so that's the exact form of the covariance of this process. When it doesn't depend on x, doesn't matter. So that's an example, that's a motivation for the study of the bifractional Brownian motion. It is related to stochastic PDs. And actually, this was the motivation for Chris Borsky and Jason Swanson to study the approximation of integrals using Riemann sums and trapezoidal Riemann sums. Because you were interested in integrals with respect to the process U, which is the solution of this SPD. And then the result that we proved with Daniel was based on a kind of general central limit theorem for the multiple Skorpot integral iterated divergence operator using Malevich calculus. So actually these limit theorems that I mentioned before were obtained using techniques of Malevich calculus that still here. And then you can say, well, you have here the middle point rule, the trapezoidal rule. Are there other numerical schemes? And actually, there is an additional paper that we wrote with Daniel. We took the system Riemann sums, and then here the critical value is 1 over 10. So this means that for h bigger than 1 over 10, you have convergence, and then for h equal to 1 over 10, you have a convergence in distribution, and the limit is a stochastic integral with respect to the independent Brownian motion, and then there is a fifth derivative that appears here. Okay, and we stop here. This was already very long and very complicated. So let's pursue these two other approximations that exist in the directions. Okay, so this is what happens. So now I want to make a further final remark about this. Is that this is essentially a one-dimensional problem. So you have just one fractional Brownian motion. And this is a one-dimensional problem. And then if you take, for example, two independent fractional Brownian motions, then the problem is completely different. And so this will be my next slide. So if you take two independent fractional Brownian motions and you want to define this, which is more or less the fractional Levy area in some sense. Okay? So what happens here is that the critical value is 1/4, no matter the kind of symmetric integral you choose. So this means that for h bigger than 1/4, you have convergence, and then for h equal to 1/4, you have a divergence in the sense that with an operating factor, you have a central limit theorem. So here the limit is just Gaussian, not conditional Gaussian. And this was proved in a joint paper with Dashes and Nordeng and also by Unterberger. So that's the reason. There's a reason. If you want to develop stochastic calculus for the fractional Brownian motion when h is less than 1/2, the critical value is 1/4. So people have used it, for example, Roth-Paz analysis, and then to construct integral stochastic calculus using Roth-Paz analysis, you need these double integrals. And these double integrals are available only if h is bigger than 1/4. So that's the reason this Roth-Paz analysis can be used to construct a stochastic calculus and to solve differential equations, but only for h bigger than 1/4. For h less than 1/4, there's no way to define this double integral because you have this divergence, and then you don't know what to do. Okay. So now I'm moving to the second part of my talk, which is related to the title, which is numerical schemes for fractional diffusions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to consider only the case h bigger than 1/2, and then consider a stochastic differential equation driven by a multidimensional fractional Brownian motion. So this means that the components are independent fractional Brownian motions. And you have some drift and some diffusion parameter. And then the stochastic integrals are Young integrals, because you expect x to have more or less the same regularity as the noise, bh. So both are Holder continuous of order almost h. So this means that if sigma is nice, this will be a Young integral. And then, well, it is known, I mean, this was proved first by Terry Lyons in 1994 using using total variation norms. And then I wrote a paper with Fractional using this fractional calculus approach. And it can be proven that this is a Pathwise equation, and it can be solved, and it is a unique solution, assuming that essentially what you need is that, so you need something stronger than Lipschitz. So sigma must be differentiable with bounded derivatives of these as Lipschitz, and then the derivatives are Holder continuous of some order bigger than 1 over h minus 1. So you need some Holder continuity on the derivative to have existence and uniqueness of the solution. And the similar conditions for P is not just so the second condition is just dependence on time. So the important condition is this one, which is for x. And B is open limit. So that's the main result. And then, so the solution of this, you can call this a fractional diffusion, but it's not a diffusion process, it's not Markovian. And so it's not a semi-martingale. And so people have studied properties of this, although, for example, it's very complicated to obtain information about the probability distribution of the solution, because you don't have the Markov property, you don't have a Markov equation for density, or even you don't know if the density exists or not. So you have to use some Gaussian methods, but not Markovian methods to study these type of equations. And for example, well, before this, the method of proof we have used with Riemann was based on these fractional integrals. And essentially, what we did with Riemann is to introduce this operator, choose an alpha between h and 1 minus h, introduce this operator, and then prove some a priori bound on this operator, in the sense that this operator is bounded by an integral of some integrated kernel times the same operator applied to f, small f. So this is the basic a priori identity inequality that allows you to iterate. Well, there's a difficulty because you have a sigma also, so you have to control double increments of sigma, because here you have a difference. Instead of just estimating h, we estimate this difference. And then when you have a sigma, this means that you have to control double increments of sigma. But this can be done with the line theorem and some conjugation arguments. And then you use these a priori estimate. That's all. It's not very complicated. So that's the approach to prove existence and uniqueness using our fractional. Well, G and F are two functions. So it's that F is integral with respect to G. So what I want is to control some operator norm in H. I want to control this using the Holder continuity of G, which is included here, and using the same operator applied to F in such a way that you can iterate. So that's the idea. This is the basic estimate that allows you to use the Nualart lemma. Okay, so as I was saying, there have been many papers on this. I just mentioned some estimates of the solution that we did in a joint paper with Janssen Pool. Then, although the solution is not Markovian, Fabrice Valverde and Martin Heider in 2007 were able to prove a version of Riemann theorem for this equation, and using some kind of Norris lemma, but they don't have marginal properties, so we have to use essentially concentration inequalities and Gaussian properties to derive this. And there is also an interesting paper by Martin Heider and Palai on ergodicity and hypergodicity, ergodicity properties. Well, ergodicity here, to be careful because it's not Markovian. So, but you can transform this into a Markov process, taking the whole bust. Not just the process, but taking the bust into account. Anyway, so what I'm going to talk is about numerical schemes. So suppose that you don't have B to simplify, just sigma, and then the first thing you want to define a numerical scheme for this equation is to take the classical Euler scheme. So you take a partition of the interval 0t, and then the Euler scheme means that you are going to freeze the value of x at the left point of the interval. So eta n is just the left point of the interval. So actually this is a sequence of recursive equations, and these give you the Euler. And then I remember that I started working with this with Julia Mishura, who is here, and then some time ago, so we started looking at this. And then, well, I didn't do the computation, that it was actually Julia who did the computations. And then she proved that the rate of convergence is of the order n to the power 1 minus 2h plus epsilon, which is not good, because when h goes to 1/2, this goes to 0. Actually, this goes to n power epsilon. But it's not good, but actually it's sharp. And then later, there was a paper by Norden and Neukirch in 2007, where in dimension 1, they proved that this error multiplied by this negative power of this converges now to a non-zero limit. So this means that you cannot improve this rate. So these are very not very good news. So the other typical classical Euler scheme behaves poorly, and so there is no way you can arrange this. So what's the reason for this? For the fact that this Euler scheme is so bad. So the reason is the following. So actually it's very simple to understand why this doesn't work. And the reason is this one. What happens is when h goes to 1/2, you know that the Euler scheme converges to the Ito equation, not to the Stochastic equation. And when h is bigger than 1/2, the equations we are dealing with are Stochastic equations, not Ito equations. So for this reason, it's natural that when h goes to 1/2, because the Euler scheme is converging to a different type of equation, you don't get the rate of conversion blows up, because you are converging to a different equation. So that's the idea. So I repeat, when h is 1/2, xn converges to the solution of the Ito equation, which can be written as a Stochastic equation plus a correction term. So now the idea is, well, let's take a modified Euler scheme in the sense that I'm going to add a term which is similar to the Stochastic correction term, which is this one. So instead of the s now, I take s minus eta s to the power 2h minus 1. When h is 1/2, this is just 1. Okay? And this is still is an Euler scheme in the sense that it is of first order in the sense that it's conditionally Gaussian. We are not adding quadratic functionals of the increments of the fractional motion. We are just adding a term which is similar to the correction term in the relation between the Ito and the Stochastic. So that's we call the modifier Euler scheme. And then what we want is to study this scheme, rate of convergence, fluctuation of the error, and that's what we have here. Okay. So I'm going to present some results about this modified Euler scheme. And here is the first result. So in L2, you have an error which is of the order gamma n minus 1, where gamma n, so here it's interesting, the speed of convergence depends on h, and there is a change of phase at 3/4, which is more or less expected. So this means that if h is between 1/2 and 3/4 is n to the power 2h minus 1/2, which when h goes to 1/2, this coincides with Brownian motion, because it gives you n to the power 1/2, which is the rate of convergence for the Euler scheme for Brownian motion. So you recover when h goes to 1/2, the rate of convergence of the Euler scheme for Brownian motion. That's good. And then so the rate of convergence is going to improve when h increases up to 3/4, because up to 3/4 this becomes n. And you cannot get something better than n. That's the idea. So you have to stop at n. And then when h is bigger than 3/4, you have to stop with n. And you cannot improve the rate of convergence. And then at 3/4, you have a logarithmic factor, which is more or less neutral. Okay? So we proved this using magnetic calculus. There is a related paper by Hilbert, but it's different because h is less. Oh, sorry, this is incorrect. H is less than 1/2. And then this is related to rock paths, so actually I shouldn't have put these references here. Okay, so that's the result that we proved. And then after this, we said, well, is this sharp? So can we obtain results on the fluctuation of the error? And the answer is yes. And then the result depends on if h is bigger than 1/4 or less, bigger than 3/4 or less than 3/4. So when h is between 1/2 and 3/4, and you take the difference between xt and the error and the approximation, you multiply by this gamma n, and then this converges in log to u, and u is a solution of a linear stochastic differential equation where there is a part driven by dh, and then there is another part driven by an independent Brownian motion. So again, this is a kind of non-central limit theorem, similar to the one I explained before with the Riemann integrals. So there is an independent Brownian motion appearing, and actually this is a matrix valued Brownian motion because it appears in this correction term multiplied by derivatives of sigma j, sigma I from 1 to n. So this is a matrix valued Brownian motion. Okay? So let me explain a little bit what is this matrix valued Brownian motion that is here. So before this, and also I will make some comments on the proof. And actually the proof can be reduced to a limit theorem for sequence of processes in the second linear case. And then you use a kind of technique called the big blocks and small blocks. But before talking about the proof, I would like to explain you what is this matrix valued Brownian motion that appears here in the limit and which is independent of BH. Okay? So this matrix valued Brownian motion, here it is. First, let's assume that H is strictly less than 3/4. And then that's the Brownian motion. And then it has a covariance which is a little bit complicated. And it depends on two quantities, Q and R, which are given by this series of integrals. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to obtain an analytic formula for these constants. Okay? And here you have delta IL, delta GK, delta GL, delta IK. So it's a very complicated matrix value process related to these constants. Perhaps if you look at this in that way, it seems too complicated. There is another formulation which is probably better, which is this one. So if I is equal to J, you have some independent Brownian motions that they call W head. And if I is different from J, you have two different Brownian motions which are independent, matrix value Brownian motion. And then this one with the tilde, this is symmetric. So this is the Gaussian, this is the random Gaussian matrix that has been studied a lot. This is the Gaussian symmetric Brownian motion. But this one is not. This has all the components independent, so it's not symmetric. So that's the reason this is not a symmetric matrix, because it has this component which is not symmetric, because all the components here of this head are all of them independent, even ij and ji. So there is a symmetric part, but there is a part which is not symmetric, and it has independent edges, independent elements at the unit. So this is also surprising. And actually, this R must be less than Q, otherwise this is not well defined. Then when H is 1/2, then Q is 1/2, and R is 0, there is no R here, and this then gives you the result that is known for Brownian motion. And Q and R, they diverge when H goes to 3/4, so at the 3/4 you have different representation. So that's the structure of this matrix valued Brownian motion, which is different from the classical symmetric Gaussian matrices. I mean, it has a component which is related, well, it's exactly the Gaussian ensemble, but there is this other component which has independent entities everywhere. And about Q and R, which are given here, we have not been able to compute, but here this numerical representation of Q. This is Q, and this is R. So you see that at 3/4 they blow up, and then at 0, Q is 1/2 and R is 0, and then that's and then always Q is bigger than R. We haven't been able to prove that Q is bigger than R. I mean, mathematical proof, but we have a computer proof. I mean, we just drop the values, take picture of the values, and then you see that Q is bigger than R. Actually, it must be bigger than R, because otherwise it's not what we find. But we haven't been able to prove that this quantity is bigger than this one. Okay. Well, so that's about this matrix valued Brownian motion. And then the limit theorem I was referring to is this one. Oh, okay, sorry, before. When H is 3/4, then what you have is Wij is just the Gaussian symmetric random matrix. In that case, you have exactly the Gaussian symmetric random matrix. There is no R. And then Q and R are 3 over 6, and then that's the expression, and then it's a T multiplied. So at 3/4, the situation is So that's the limit theorem where this W appears. So suppose that you take integrals of W of BH as minus BK, integral with respect to BH. So this is a kind of double integral. And here you have I, here you have J, and you take a partition, and then you take the limit of this, and then the limit of this converges in low with the normalization command to this W. So this W appears as the limit of these quantities, which are the quantities that are relevant in this modified numerical Euler scheme. So this is the basic limit theorem for quadratic functions. And actually, this is true with, I mean, when n is 1, we are in one dimension, this double integral can be computed, and this is the Hermite polynomial, and that's a particular case of the Grover major theorem in 73. So actually, this can be viewed as a multidimensional or matrix valued Grover major theorem. And the difference is that in higher dimensions, you cannot write this as an Hermite polynomial, because if I is different from j, you cannot compute this integral. When I is equal to j, you can compute this integral, you get this, which is an Hermite polynomial. You have a functional of your Grover motion. Now you have two independent I and j, then you cannot write this as in a closed form as an Hermite polynomial. So you have to prove this by hand, and then the proof is based on this fourth moment theorem. I mean, you have to prove convergence of the moment of order 2, moment of order 4, and that's all. Because this is in the second Miller case. So because you are in the second Miller case, to prove this convergence law, we have used this fourth moment theorem. Yeah. So that's the basic ingredient, and this is where this W appears. And then the fourth moment theorem, here it is, which is have a sequence of multiple integrals. So we apply this theorem with Q is 2, and then you have convergence of the moment of order 2, then convergence in low to a normal distribution is equivalent to the convergence of the moment of order 4. And actually, this fourth moment theorem was extended by Lieutenant Ficati using a combination of Mayer calculus and the States method. But that's another topic. I'm not going to talk about this. But this is the theorem that we used to prove this proposition. Okay, so that's the first ingredient. And once you have this proposition, then what you do, you have something like this. So now if you take finite sums of processes multiplied by increments of this form, so now, so in some sense, that's a kind of weighted version of the previous theorem. So I'm inserted here some random weights which are Holder continuous. Then this converges to the stochastic integral of this process with respect to the matrix value process W. And that's general result. Well, there is a general central limit theorem for weighted sums that we prove it in a paper with Cornell and Podolsky. And then as a consequence, you take something like this. Okay, and this is the type of terms that you get in your error fluctuation of the Euler schemes. And the proof of this weighted theorem is based on this small block and big block proposition. So that's a weighted version of the previous theorem where you insert these weights, which are, you just need some other continuities. Other continuity bigger than I have of this matrix value process. And then this converges to stochastic integral. And here you have this conditionally Gaussian, because W is Gaussian, and then this is the process that you have. So these are more or less the ingredients of the proof of this theorem. And then what happens if H is bigger than 3/4? If H is bigger than 3/4, then if you remember this Grover major theorem, when H is bigger than 3/4, you don't have a limit to a Gaussian, you have a limit to something called the Rosenblatt process that was studied very much by Tudor. Okay, so here we have again a matrix valued Rosenblatt process, which in some sense is the multidimensional version of the Rosenblatt process. So in other words, now you take the error, multiply by n, this converges low to u bar. U bar is a kind of solution of a linear stochastic differential equation given by b and given by a Rosenblatt process, and the Rosenblatt process is not independent of b, it's a function of b. It's a quadratic function of bh, actually. And so I'm going to tell you what is this matrix valued Rosenblatt process in the next slide. Here it is. So you take the same sequence as before, remember? And then if h is bigger than 3/4, then this sequence multiplied by n converges to a matrix valued process in the second chaos, which is called the generalized Rosenblatt process. And in dimension 1, then this is the classical Rosenblatt process. The limit of this is the classical Rosenblatt process that was studied by Tudor. So this is a matrix value, probably it's non-symmetric also. So I'm not going to write explicitly the value of this matrix value in the reciprocal process, but this is what you obtain with H given inequalities. Right? And so finally, this is my last slide. You may ask what happens when you take weak approximation. For example, for Brownian motion, it is known that if you want to study the rate of convergence of some expectation of a function of your process, and you approximate this by the expectation of a function of your numerical scheme. For Brownian motion, this difference, you can get a very good rate of convergence depending on the function n. And there are many works of this by Bali and many people. And here what happens is that the rate of convergence is just 1 over n. Which is, remember, that was the best rate of convergence, and this is always 1 over n, no matter the value of h. So it's different from the previous results. And it's also optimal in the sense that if you multiply this by n, you get a final limit, and this limit depends on some variable derivative here. So weak approximation is a little bit different from the results I proved before. And that's the rate that you obtain. So these are some references. So most of the results that I have presented here were obtained in collaboration with Yatsun Hu and Yang Yu, who is a graduate student. And it's in the archive, and it's going to appear in the Alpha Applied Probability. That's the paper by Mishura. And then that's also the result I mentioned by Neunkirch and Norden. And that's the case with H is less than 1/2, where there is a kind of also Lipstein type scheme proven by these people. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much today for a nice and informative talk. Questions?
Only short question. Was the weak approximation only for H more than 1/2?
Yeah, this is just H bigger than 1/2. So this refers to the equation defined using the Young integral. So we did this for the equation. So H is bigger than 1/2. If H is less than 1/2, then you have to use this rough path analysis, and there are results, as I mentioned, this paper by Norden, and that actually a project we have is trying to extend these results when H is less than 1/2. But for the moment, we haven't done anything in that direction.
You have some results with difference of just parameters?
No, that's a good question. You can also try to do this, but what happens when you have different parameters for every component? And then, of course, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
Probably a very naive question. In the first part, you talk about several different approximation schemes. And you take the midpoint and then the Simpson method.
Yeah.
And you got this in your limit. The formula looks very similar in the limits, right? But you only have these 3 cases. You don't have, say, 1/8 and.
No. We go down from.
You said and 10 is already quite a lot. You mentioned something like that, but it's.
The Simpson rule, which is the numerical scheme, a little more sophisticated than the trapezoidal, give you already 1/10. And there is a reason for these numbers. There's some polynomials, and then, But
Because my naive guy is, you got the 3 first primes there, and I don't know if that's the case.
no, there are some numbers there. After 1/10, I don't remember which is the next one. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I have a question. At the very end, like when we were talking about fixing the Euler scheme, so you get sort of a better rate of convergence. So there was this boundary of h equal to 3/4, right, when you had it on pen. So can you do something about it by doing a different correction? What have in mind? So then you when your correction term are in the second chaos.
Yes.
Can you do something, with the high order chaos to get a better boundary?
Yeah, well, you can try to get modified München scheme, for example. So you add a second order term Brownian motion and then some correction. So for example, Milstein for Brownian motion is better than Euler, and it gives you a better rate of convergence. But again, this converges to the integral. So you can take a Milstein scheme and then modify it with some correction term and try to get something better. And then you get probably, as you said, not just quadratic functionals, but cubic functionals. Yeah, that we thought also about doing something like this, but we haven't done. But that's another thing that we could try to do.
Okay, any other questions?
Yep.
This whole machinery of this Wagner methods for stochastic differential equations, numerical methods, and you also in this direction.
Yeah, well, but here we just consider that the simplest one is the Euler, and then as we told you, at least you can try to get the Milstein and try to do some correction term in the Milstein and get something better and even more elaborated scheme like but we can't really. We just have focused here on the point because the other already fluctuation was already complicated. Yeah, that's what you use the Milstein scheme, and then you can get Milstein integrals. Yeah, you can try to refine this in any action, but this is a very simple idea. Take the other scheme, correct it using this Stochastic correction, and then you get something already. But of course, you can do this in any action. So
Your diffusion coefficient needed to be 4 or 5 times.
yes. Yeah.
I already said why.
Yeah, because you use Mayer calculus, and then you do integration by parts, and then you have integrated by parts several times, and then that's the reason. So all these debates are obtained using Mayer calculus, and a lot of integration by parts problems. And then to do this integration by parts, you need all these integratives, which probably they are necessary because of the method, not because of the result.
So it might be true without.
Might be true without these conditions, but the methods we use they require smooth conditions.
Okay, anybody else? Well, I think we've explored the enough.